Good evening, all. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
How's your week?
Pretty good. No Pat tonight, though. He's I think he's up at a lake with his family, and when he got there, he discovered they have like no bandwidth. So.
That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So we're gonna, just for the sake of it, because we haven't done it in a while, we're just gonna start with a little Axanar trailer, because let's kill some time while everyone's coming on board.
Sounds good.
Sometimes you look outside and you see a storm coming. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. You're just a witness to whatever's coming your way. But it's never the heart of the storm that matters. It's the heart of the people inside the storm.
Weapons free! Fire at will!
All right.
That was really cool.
You will command the whole squadron, and Minneapolis is going to be your flagship. Rear Admiral Nansen.
Our task is to take over the patrol in this sector and stabilize the situation.
Runner Chieftain is fighting in his own territory. It is dispersive ground. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay is desperate ground. On desperate ground, fight.
So there you go. There's the two best fan film trailers currently available. I always like
pretty good.
The guys at Squadron deserve a lot of credit because they did a really nice job. So I always like playing them. And then for everyone, what a great group we have here. There's already 63 people live, so that's great. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern, we're doing a watch party with Vance Major Owens with one of his Constar Chronicle movie. Now, Vance, listen, if you like Axanar and Squadron, Vance is the other end of the fan film spectrum. He's shot on iPhones. There's literally like no money spent on production value. It's all pure story, and it's story and character. It's this character Menard that he's been working, and there's such heart and soul in it. And we want to, we love Vance because he's so passionate. And he's like, hey, Alec, I'm thinking of using your, the Hercules. Can you send me something with the Hercules on it? And I'll send him I send him like 5 hats and 10 patches and stickers and stuff. And he's so, so he's like, feels the need to put it all in his show, but he's great. He's great. We love Vance. So anyway, there you go. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, that's a special Axanar After Dark, which is before dark. So we'll just say it's an Axanar watch party tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And then of course, we'll be back at 10 o'clock with Trek After Dark, Axanar After Dark. We're just going to call it. Why don't we just call it Axanar After Dark? So anything happened at work you can tell us about? Like, did you plan to invade the Soviet Union?
Not my division. not my department.
So your question: there is no Soviet Union.
Well, they changed the name, so
but everything stays the same.
They frequently act like the old Soviet Union. So.
Don't they? Well, what do you want when you get a former KGB spy master in charge?
Yeah. So, but it is what it is. I mean, international politics is always sort of a dirty business. So.
Oh God. There's Don Gaffney. How are you doing, Don? Don is one of our Klingon wardrobe consultants.
Okay.
So yeah, he's a good friend of the show. It looks like all the usuals are here: BM, Karen Bengtson, Casey Bay, Donnie Pearson, Charles Williamson. How are you guys doing? Callum McIntyre. Good to see you guys tonight. Hope you're ready for some space combat, or as I said in the description, pew pew in space. But,
yes.
You know what? I think we told you all last week we were going to talk about shields and shielding and how that plays in science fiction. We decided to table that since Pat couldn't make it this week. So tell us, what are we going to talk about tonight, Chris?
Well, so I thought that a good thing to talk about. The reason why I'm the one who suggested that we table that, because Pat really knows the Star Trek stuff backwards and forwards, because he's been working on a game set, a game that could be used to play Star Trek stuff. So he's like been watching everything. So, he's just much better at that stuff than I am. You know, he can tell you, oh no, in this particular episode they did this particular.
Right.
Not my Jeopardy category, right? I can do sort of the big picture when it comes to that stuff, but that's why Pat and I make a good team, is because like I was going to talk about all the other places in science fiction, the different types of shields and stuff that we see in other parts of science fiction, which is not his Jeopardy category. So, so it occurs to me that one of the things that we can talk about is something that's really is kind of my Jeopardy category, which is sort of combat information centers and bridges and how all those things get used in combat and how the ships talk to each other and the importance of command and control and the doctrine that goes along with it.
Great.
So, because that really is kind of my Jeopardy category, and so
which is good and appropriate for Axanar, since it's something that me as a neophyte or in this area decided that I was going to add a little spice into this traditional Star Trek world, by adding a fleet kind of fleet control aspect to the USS Ares.
Yeah, which is a nice touch. I mean, this is something that for all of you, the rest of you out there, Alec and I have been talking about this for a while. I mean, we had that first conversation like 2+ years ago.
Yeah,
talking about what exactly does the fleet ops console do. He knew he wanted one. What does it actually do? And I said, "Ooh, I got ideas." Let's see. I see Charles Williamson saying that he was. Oh yeah, okay. TAO qualified. All right. So he's another guy who could talk about this stuff. So for the record, I was never in the Navy. I did have a job at one point where I was the crazy guy that you could get to go ride a ship on 2 weeks' notice. I was working for the Center for Naval Analysis, and I have 87 days at sea, 13 exercise reconstructions, 13 exercises, 10 of them at sea, on 9 different trips to sea on 7 different ships. There's a couple of ships I got to go back a second time. About half of that time was on aircraft carriers, so I got to see how they solve the problem, which they're doing a different problem, right? They're not doing the individual ship. They're doing fleet stuff. And then the rest of my time was on cruisers and destroyers. And so I got to see a lot of different stuff. And in all of those but one, I was hunkered down in either the Combat Information Center, which is what they call it on a cruiser or destroyer, or the Combat Direction Center, which is what they call it on an aircraft carrier. I was hunkered down in that space, watching the guys play the greatest game known to mankind, which is doing a naval exercise. And as a friend of mine puts it, playing with the 1300 or the 1800 millimeter figures, playing a 5,000 person double blind flat top with the 1,800 millimeter figures.
And there's a question for you here from Jim Westbrook.
Okay.
Chris, I found it interesting that the last ship has both a bridge and a CIC. Is that normal for the Navy?
Yeah, and so I'm glad you mentioned the last ship because I was going to forget it. Now, I have not seen very many episodes of that show, so what I am about to say, I am basing it entirely on pictures that I have found on the internet. But I went looking I was curious as to how they were going to dress that set and how they were going to do it. The thing about the last ship is it's supposedly an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. The CIC is arranged like an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. And if you ignore the things like the color of the walls and the fact that it looks like they took an Arleigh Burke and sort of ran it through the science fiction converter a little bit and made it look less naval ship-like and more futuristic. Because they like have they have the walls are nice, and a lot of stuff in the Navy stands out from the walls. Like you don't actually build stuff into the wall like they do in Star Trek. You wouldn't do that because you got to be able to get behind it to fix it, right? So what you basically have is out in front of everything stands out from the wall, and you may need to have your smallest, thinnest guy to get back there to fix stuff, but there's always space there, and they don't do any stuff like that in the last ship. But it's generally the same layout, and yeah, they do have a bridge in a CIC. The bridge is about maneuvering, by and large. It's about making the ship go from where you want it to go in a safe and professional manner. So that's where they steer from. You've got lookouts up there, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of making the decisions about where they're going to go and how you fight the ship and how you run the sensors, et cetera, that's all done in the Combat Information Center. Because that's where the captain goes when they call general quarters, when they go to red alert. The captain goes to the CIC, the executive officer goes to the bridge, generally. And actually, technically it's the pilot house. The bridge used to be the outside portion, if I remember correctly, but like there isn't anything that says bridge, it says pilot house in the little tag over the door. And so usually the people in the pilot house are more junior than the people down in CIC, because those are the guys that actually have their fingers on the trigger. And so the first thing you do if you're a surface warfare officer and you go to your first ship, you got to qualify, you got to earn your pin. You got to earn your warfare pin. And you do that by standing a metric shit ton of watches to make it happen. So you've always got an officer of the watch, and you've got a junior officer of the watch, or an officer of the deck and a junior officer of the deck. I'm sorry, let me get my terminology right. And then you've got one guy who's got the deck and one guy who's got the con. And so the deck, it's sort of like if you took a pilot of an airplane and you separated his brain from the rest of his body. And so he was giving verbal commands to his body. So the conning officer is frequently like a chief, usually he's a chief, and he's the guy who's giving specific instructions to the helmsman in terms of what to do. The deck officer is sort of running the show up there. So the deck officer will say, bring us about, chief, or, turn us around or something like that. There's a very formal way to do it, but unfortunately, I haven't actually been to sea for like 15 years, and I'm beginning to forget the exact nuances of how they talk. And then the conning officer will give very specific instructions, make your rudder 15 degrees, blah, 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 gives very specific instructions on exactly how to do it. And the helmsman and the lee helm, if there is one, lee helm is the guy who controls the throttles. They do those very specific instructions exactly as the conning officer says. And so it's usually bifurcated like that because the deck, the officer of the deck, he's got a lot of other things he's concerned about. He's not just driving. In fact, he's not really driving. because he's got to worry about all the other ships out there. He's got to worry about what everybody else in the bridge is doing. He's the guy who's ultimately in charge. And so the Navy, there's a lot of places where the Navy sort of splits things up like that. Like if the captain comes on the bridge, he does not generally take the deck. And if he does take the deck, taking the deck is when you say, I'm going to be the guy in charge now. If he does take the deck, he very specifically says, I have the deck. Because you need to make sure there's no ambiguity as to who's running the show in that case. So like in Star Trek terms, what really kind of happens is, like in the original series, Kirk will give a command to Sulu, and Sulu just knows what to do. And so Sulu's kind of, because he's an officer, he's not like an enlisted guy running it. He's an officer, not like you generally have a junior enlisted guy who's actually working turning the ship. He's actually turning the rudder, and then you've got the senior enlisted guy who's telling him exactly what to do. So it's more like a command relationship where he's telling the pilot what to do, and the pilot knows how to do all that pilot stuff. And he just does that pilot stuff.
Right.
And that, interestingly, that's kind of, in the submarine force, they generally do it the same way, except the latest generation of submarines, the Virginia class, they actually operate a lot closer to what we see in Next Generation, right? In Next Generation, you have helm and ops. Not helm and navigator, but helm and ops. Whereas the helmsman is responsible for the safe navigation of the ship, and the ops manager is responsible for everything else that's going on the ship. So he's not steering the ship, but he's the guy who's working the sensors and making sure that all the mission stuff is getting done, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So he's sort of functioning as the command supervisor there. And so that's why, Wesley is busy steering. Data's the guy who's making all the sensor reports, and, he's giving all the other information. He's doing all the other things. So, so they do split it up, so that you've got the guys on the bridge that are maneuvering the ship, and usually it's an 03, maybe even a little bit more junior than that. Good comment. So you've got the 03s that are steering the ship, maybe the JGs, if they're senior JGs and they've qualified, probably they have by the time they get to JG, because the surface force has a tendency to push the guys out quickly as ensigns, so they get a chance to qualify as soon as they can. In fact, I remember one lieutenant making the comment that they never let him drive anymore, and that he had gotten senior enough that they didn't let him do the fun stuff. Now, it's funny that one of my mentors at CNA, who was a retired naval officer, his comment is that he wanted to get through all that stuff. He knew how to do all that stuff, learned how to do it, but he really wanted to go downstairs and be the tactical action officer, because he's the guy who gets to fire the guns. He's the guy who gets to run the problem. And so when you go down there into the CIC, there's a tactical action officer who's running the show down there, unless they're at general quarters and the captain comes down. If the skipper comes down, he takes the second seat and he's running the show with the tactical action officer there with him. And like anything else, there's an A team. If they go to general quarters, the A team goes on duty. And so the lead TAO will go down there, and they all know where they are in the pecking order. And sometimes it's not exactly what you might think. Like I knew about one ship where they said that the chief engineer was the lead TAO because he was just the best guy. Do some subs have accurate information? It kind of depends. I must admit, I haven't seen Crimson Tide, which is a failure of me as a human being. I have seen JAG, and take everything with JAG with a grain of salt, because it's always stripped down for television. That's always the problem with something that's episodic on television, is that they frequently will cut corners on it. So the best that I can say about JAG is that they cut corners on stuff like that. Trying to think of something that's Hunt for Red October isn't horrible when it comes to that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of information in Hunt for Red October that isn't correct, but in terms of like how they talk to each other, etc., that's pretty good. Yeah. So Derek asked the question of, he always wondered in Trek why they don't stand around a table in CIC and run the battle that way. And that's basically, that's how you do it on a regular Navy ship. That's how they do it on aircraft carriers. On the escorts and destroyer, the escort ships, the destroyers and cruiser, basically they are sitting looking at a big display, but it's not showing the outside. I mean, this entire idea that you would have this giant display at the front of the room and you'd use it as a window, right? What can you see out? It's dark. You can't see, and everything is really far away. You can't see anything. You know, submarines don't have windows. That's not how they run the tactical problem. So I would think that what you would have is a big display up there that would be showing you everything that's going around. And that's the way to run it. I've got a few things I'd like to share, if you don't mind me taking control.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let me move this over to one side so I don't lose the ability to interact with StreamYard. Let me bring up the presentation. And now let me see if I can make this work.
There we go.
All right, so this is a little presentation that I do at science fiction conventions because I've been collecting this information over several years now. And so special thanks to Winchell Chung, who I'll point out his slide on this. He helped a great deal. And I first put this together because for his Atomic Rockets of the Space Patrol page, he was interested in stuff like this. And so he asked me to put something together. So, all right, why can I not make it go? All right, so that's an illustration that I pulled out of Wikipedia. And I'm going to explain all that because that is really kind of hard for you to tell exactly what you're looking at, right? Because it doesn't differentiate very well. So I'll show you what this all means. A lot of what I put together here was from memory. I didn't do it when I was spending a lot of time on ships. I did do it when I was at the Naval War College, and occasionally I get a chance to tour a ship. It's worth pointing out that no two DDGs are the same. They just aren't. There's always modifications. So I've got, every time I go on board DDG and see at CIC, once I started doing this, which was 2008-ish, something like that, I would then go home and create a new slide and show and make little modifications. You'll see it. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of omitted, like there's some emergency gear that's attached to these posts and stuff like that. There's a major CIC upgrade going on that I'll talk about at the end that I haven't had a chance to see yet. And it's killing me that I didn't get a chance to see it. I had a contact where I might have been able to go and see it in the simulator, and I didn't get a chance to see it. I call it the Battlestar Galactica mod for reasons that I'll explain. And so let me go to the next slide. So this is what those things mean. So let me see if I can get a pointer options, laser pointer. All right. So like these are flat surfaces, what we would call desks. They might have keyboards on them or something like that. So that's a flat surface. The blue ones are chairs, and the red is a monitor. So what you're seeing here is the top view of a monitor. Here you're seeing a flat surface that has, that right there is a lift panel that you lift it off, and there's a keyboard built into the panel. But you can put this metal panel there so that if you're like got a binder open and you're working on something, you're okay. And this here is a chair. And so these are screens, and they're rear projection screens. So here's a little projection room in the back. And these things in front of those screens are actually lockers. They're down low, and they have emergency gear in them. And then these things here are stacks of monitors. So if I go back, you can see those are two monitor stacks. They're just regular CRT displays that are stacked up. These are flat tables. In some cases, they're like a chart table that may have a light from underneath. In some cases, they're a flat, like an LCD display. And so it's like a big monitor, but it's flat. And then let's see, that's a hatch. In fact, actually, I think, yeah. here's a little bit better description. That's a hatch. That's a post. That's a post supporting the ceiling. This is a door in the lower left-hand corner and another door in the lower right-hand corner. So that is the way the door swings open. That takes you out into a passageway. This one takes you out this way, and there's an office back here. And that's sort of where all the paperwork is for all the maintenance stuff that they do, etc. And then the rest of it is split up into various tasks. So surface warfare, undersea warfare, close-in weapons system, command and control systems. I mean, look at the amount of stuff that they do for just passing information back and forth. That's just controlling the link, et cetera, electronic warfare, et cetera. This piece of gear right here, I've never seen it. It was removed from the fleet before I got there. I think somebody told me that they thought it was an inertial navigation system of some sort. If you look at the floor, because this is all a raised floor, all this gear is water cooled. So this floor is about 8 inches higher than the floor in the passageway out there. In fact, right here is a step down area. Those are step down areas. So you go down a big step and then out into the passageway. If you look at the floor there, there is a panel that is exactly the shape of that thing. So when they removed it, they had to put in a new piece of flooring that went in there. So this is what I sent to Winchell Chung to explain what all this stuff was, because he had asked me about all that stuff. Oh, and this stuff here is just like lockers and gear and stuff like that's probably a safe. I seem to recall that if I remember correctly, that's a safe also for classified documents. So this is what I sent to Winchell Chung, and this is what he did with it. And so his is a lot nicer looking, but mine actually has the words on it, so I use them both. And so at the center, this Aegis combat system that's what makes all the magic happen. That's the heart of the system. And that is the Aegis display system is part of the Aegis combat system, which also includes the Spy 1D radar. It's a 1D on this ship. I think it's a 1C on the cruisers, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong on that. There's different variations of the spy radar because they've made multiple different versions of it, because this is technology that we've shared with some of our closest allies, like the Japanese build ships with it and the Spanish build ships with it, et cetera. But they have different versions of that radar because it's a really heavy radar, and they have different size ships that they're putting it on. So there's a bunch of different, it's a federation of computer systems that's passing information back and forth. And then it also includes the missile launchers that have all the missiles, and it sends the information out to. So a lot of these are just regular computer workstations. Like this is just one of them is just a regular internet terminal. Just a regular unclassified, they generally have an unclassified terminal and a classified terminal, so you can get the stuff. So, you know, a lot of these places, well, last time I was on board, they had laptop displays that they had bolted on, laptop shelves, so that you could have a laptop. So everybody got individual stuff. The first one, the ships came out in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. So it was really the days before the internet, before this idea of, before laptops, let alone before ubiquitous personal computers. For things like this. And so the end result of that was that they're constantly retrofitting all this stuff.
Yeah, that room has got to be, getting less dense all the time.
Yeah, I don't know what they've done with it so far. I mean, as a general rule, you just cram more stuff in. So it actually ends up getting more dense. For most of these, a lot of these are not filled during normal times, but when they go to general quarters, they are. I'll note an Aegis ship is primarily about air warfare. So these two guys are enlisted. Their officer is the TAO. As of these three, it's generally 2 enlisted folks and an officer, 2 enlisted and an officer. This one is really only manned if they think they're going to be doing either a land attack mission, i.e. firing Tomahawk cruise missiles, or they're doing gunfire support. And so at least in the old days, back in the days when I was on board, they had these plexiglass displays that they would use for status information. And you write on it with a grease pencil, and it shines a light up through it. It makes it fluoresce. It's really cool. The displays for the land attack, or for all the gunfire stuff, actually most of the time were folded up to, so that they were parallel with the ceiling. And then they'd pull some pins, rotate them down, lock them in place, and then they'd use them if they were doing gunfire missions ashore. For the land attack stuff, because they're firing Tomahawks, that's at a higher classification level for historical reasons, having to do with missions that that missile no longer does. And so there's curtains that you can pull around that station, and it also can include this table. So if they want to go to a top secret level, they pull the curtains around, and if you don't have the right clearance, you can't go back there. And I guess they spend a lot of time pointing at the screen because they can't do a whole lot of talking about that stuff. But I never saw that. I never saw them do anything like that. So let me go to this. So when we go to the next slide, you're basically standing right about here looking that way. So we got the two big displays. We've got right there, you see one of the two stacks of monitors. Here you see H and G are two stacks of monitors. Those monitors include status information, like they'll tell you what the shot doctrine is on their missiles. One of them usually has in fact, I think it's the one right underneath the G there. That's probably a camera view of the helo deck on the back. Because they want to know what the status of the helo is if they're doing helo ops, and the easiest way for these guys to know about that is just to have a camera pointed back there. And so it's just other ship information, like course and speed. Here's some course and speed information up there too, but one of these probably has some more of it. And then there's these other monitors. There's another set over here. And so what you're seeing here is those two chairs are this chair and that chair. And so this chair is usually where the the TAO sits. These two outer wing chairs are enlisted guys whose job it is to make the display sing. So like the two officers who sit here know all the switchology on the displays, but they will say, like, they'll turn to the enlisted guy and say, I want the following setup on the right screen and the following setup on the left screen, blah, 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 blah. And those guys will be the guys that'll do it for them so that these guys can keep their head in the tactical problem and not have to worry about switching all the stuff on the screens.
Gotcha.
So you're seeing, this is an enlisted guy. That's an officer. Those things are radios. They actually they can listen to one channel in each ear of the earphones.
Wow.
And then you've got speakers up there, so you can have more channels going on. The greatest number of channels I ever listened to at one time, I think, was 5, because I had one in each ear and I had it pulled off my ears, and there were 3 speakers going on in the room. And luckily, not everybody's talking at the same time. There's an ebb and flow, so that works. And when somebody talks, you go, okay, I need to focus in on that one. These pouches on the back generally either hold like binders or emergency gear. As a general rule, they're empty these days. Note these chairs are bolted to the floor. You can see where the panels all come up. This is sort of an island in between the two officer stations. Those are rear projection displays. If you go back to the older cruisers, which are all out of the fleet now, but I did some time on USS Vincennes, one of the first 5 Ticonderogas. Those were all black and white displays.
Oh my gosh.
But at some point they went to color. And off on the right-hand side, we have a stool because there's a table. One of those flat tables is over there. Let's see what else is notable in that. I think that's about it for that. So I'm not going to go through all the different positions here, but note, this is the modification they made aboard the USS Mahan. So that was instead of being a sort of sculpted curved table with 2 seats, it was a flat table with 4, and they added a desk there in the electronic warfare system center part of the bridge. This is what they did aboard the USS Cole. So they have flat panel displays up there, and then that was like a bookshelf where they had binders. And it also had a build out back there. In this ship, the Forrest Sherman, they put the bookcase over on the side, but they had the flat panel displays. And I was on board that ship in 2009. I did a tour when I was up at the War College. That was the first time I was on board one of the Flight 3 DDGs, which has a hangar for helicopters on board. The other ones have a helicopter deck. The first 2 flights have a helicopter deck. I'm sorry, I said Flight 3. It's really a Flight 2A, because they were going to do a Flight 3 and it was really expensive. So they said, nah, we're not going to do a Flight 3. We'll do a 2A instead. That's the cheaper version. And Nicholas, that's why I do talks like this, is because this stuff is hard to find. And I know that I've got information that I can pass on to science fiction fans and science fiction writers. So they did the Flight 2A, and now they're working on doing a Flight 3 that is closer to what they originally thought of for a Flight 3. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's the last one. So, so that's what it looks like on board. Okay, I thought I stopped it.
Yeah, you did.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, my question, this is the question I was actually thinking of as I was driving back.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking, so the question, I guess the question I really want to know is extrapolating out how much human input will there actually be into the battles that Star Trek?
That's a fantastic question. That's an utterly fantastic question, because we're seeing more and more automation all the time.
Right.
We're seeing much better stuff with data links and stuff like that all the time. Star Trek, as a general rule, doesn't really handle that kind of thing particularly well. I mean, it both does and it doesn't, right? You've got ubiquitous computing capability that we can only dream about. But on the other hand, there's still lots of guys talking on the radio saying, do X, do Y, do Z, when you would expect that all this stuff to be shared throughout the fleet. Like those that I pointed to, that command and control section over there, that's about making the data link work. Modern data links are just now, the US Navy is working really hard to implement the capability to make them work the way that everybody who ever heard about a data link thinks it works. Because a lot of it's the difference between what you can call track quality data and targeting quality data. So you've got these data links that are passing information. You know, I'm on board an Aegis ship and my radar is seeing the world, etc., and I'm tagging contacts and it's being passed to the other ships in the fleet, and everybody's got a common operational picture that they're looking at, so they see things on their display that other ships see. Maybe beyond the horizon, they can't see it, but other ships can see it. But that doesn't mean you can shoot off of it. Like if your radar, with the early mods until very recently with Aegis, you could have, if your radar's off, you can't shoot. Even though it's like, I can see it, it's right there on the screen. Why can't I shoot? And it's because you've got this sort of imprecise location data on it. It's track quality data. It's in approximately this location. But it's not targeting quality data, right? So you can think of this as, say I've got a rifle and I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot a target. And it's like a 3-foot target. I got to put a bullet in like a 3-foot area, right? So I have to have a pretty good idea of where to aim at, right? But it's actually a fairly easy problem conceptually. I don't really need to know where I am. I don't really need to know where the target is beyond the fact I can see the target, it's over there, and it's about such and such a distance. So if I'm going to calculate how much the bullet drop is, in fact, I may even know exactly the distance, not because I'm measuring it, but just because I'm standing behind a line and I've been told how far it is. You know, so there's a little bit of bullet drop stuff, and then most of it is about my ability to precisely aim. It's not really about knowing where the target is, and it's not really about knowing where I am. Well, what if instead of that, somebody's going to tell me how to aim, and they're standing 30 feet over there, and they're going to give me instructions on how to aim. So they have to have a pretty good idea where the target is. They have to have a pretty good idea where I am. They have to have a pretty good idea about the relationship between those, and they have to be able to pass the data to me so that I'm glad that Mr. Voigt asked that question. I'm going to get to that in just a second. And so that's, I would have to be able to pass, the person would have to pass that information to me, and I'd have to be able to do something very precise with it. And so until recently, we just sort of said, you know what, he just has to be on, right? So you can do queuing, you can tell somebody there's a target there, but if you want to shoot it, you have to actually flip it on. Two changes came about. The first change was they added this capability to Aegis that I'm blanking on what they call it, but it basically allowed a bunch of data to be passed over the data link that was more than just the track information. It was more than just, you know, it's at this location moving at this course and speed. It was actually, you're passing radar data over and very precise information on where the ship gathering that information is, so that then the Aegis system can do all the calculations and figure out where it is. Now, Alec, you can tell me where the target is, and I can shoot off of that, and I can do it just fine. So the next step was something called NIFCA, Navy Integrated Fire Control Counter Air, which was expanding that capability to include the E2C Hawkeyes and potentially other platforms that are in the air. So at least in theory now, a surface ship can fire off of data that it gets from an airplane. So it used to be that the airplane would put the data into the link, and so you'd know where to look, but you'd still have to look yourself with your own radar to take that shot. Now they can actually take shots off of each other's tracks. So now we're finally at the point where this is beginning to work like everybody assumed. When I first heard the concept of data links, it's like, oh yeah, you can do X, Y, and Z, right? All the stuff you can do in a David Weber novel. I should be able to fire off somebody else. Nah, you couldn't do any of that stuff. It was all about limitations. Now you've got all that stuff coming in, and you can actually do that stuff. Now, we haven't really talked about fleets. So the closest thing I've seen to a fleet is a carrier battle group, because I did this long enough ago that they were still battle groups. It was the first couple of exercises I did was before they implemented the strike group concept, which made the battle groups smaller. So you got lots of ships moving around. So there is a combat direction center on the aircraft carrier, and it has basically 3 sections. One section is all the ship's defense stuff. It's very comparable to what you might have on an Arleigh Burke. It's generally a little smaller, but it's very, very comparable to that. Maybe about the same size when you include the undersea warfare stuff. The undersea warfare people generally have their own area or their own room right off of it, and then there's basically a big room and a little room. The little room is undersea warfare. The big room is split in half, and half of it is ship self-defense. And they've got a couple of guys sitting in chairs and the big vertical displays and that stuff. And they're about defending the aircraft carrier. Next to them is where the Sea Combat Commander is. The Sea Combat Commander is a Navy captain, a Navy 06, equivalent to a colonel in one of the other services. And he's responsible for fighting the battle group against surface and subsurface threats. He's both the surface warfare commander and the subsurface warfare commander, the undersea warfare commander.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
He does both of those. I'm sorry, what was that?
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and so it's really kind of funny how this all breaks down. Like, you would think, the captain of the aircraft carrier, he's the captain of the ship. Everybody works for him, right? Half the guys on an aircraft carrier do not work for the captain. Half the guys are the air wing. They work for the commander of the air wing, who's also a Navy 06, who's the strike lead. And a small group of people work for the Sea Combat Commander. He's maybe 30-ish, kind of. I'm not quite sure. And he's the guy that owns all the destroyers and cruisers generally. You've got an air warfare commander who's responsible for making Aegis happen and coordinating the air defense of the fleet. He's the senior 06 on one of the cruisers. And then you've got the admiral. And the admiral is also, he and his staff are also in the aircraft carrier. So the captain of the aircraft carrier owns the building, but his boss is one of his tenants. Kind of how that works out. And the admiral and his staff, they have an entirely different command space called the Tactical Flag Command Center, where they operate from, which I've never been in it when it's been at sea. I've seen it a couple of times ashore, when we've been in port, I mean. And their space is always, they get the good gear first, and then so like they'll remodel their space, and then they give their old gear to the combat direction center, and then their old gear gets taken off the ship. And so it just sort of works that way. And basically every strike group, when they're getting ready to deploy, the admiral and his staff get to reconfigure the space with the latest gear, because you always want to make sure you've got the latest stuff, right? You're spending a lot of money to make sure these ships have the right stuff, and they write them hard and put away wet. So it's good to replace that stuff every couple of years. But that's how they're worried about controlling the fleet, but they push as much responsibility down to as low as level as possible. They generally give mission type orders, which is, I want you to go and do this thing, but I'm not going to tell you how to do the thing. I'm just going to tell you the thing that I want you to do, right? I'm going to tell you the mission. You figure out how to do it yourself because you're a smart guy. We trained you to figure out how to do it yourself. And they generally practice command by negation, which means the admiral tells his subordinates his intent. And then he and his staff sit back and watch the show. And they listen to all the radios, all the different channels. They listen to all what everybody's doing. And if they like what they're hearing, they generally don't say a word. Huh. The only time you hear from them, there's 2 times you hear from them. On, I think once or twice, I heard, the Sea Combat Commander staff, they go by their call sign is Zulu. So like if your battle group or your strike group is, if their overall call sign is Bravo, that would make him Bravo Zulu. So it's like Bravo Zulu gives an order, and at which point Bravo Bravo, which is the admiral, Bravo Bravo comes on and says, this is Bravo Bravo, belay that last order, do this instead. I've heard that happen like twice. Most of the time when the admiral or staff, and I say, Bravo Bravo comes on, they actually don't. It's their staff. It might be a chief. It might be a chief giving orders to a captain, because the chief is speaking with the voice of the admiral when he's doing that. Right. And like you have enlisted guys giving orders, speaking with the voice of their captain for the Sea Combat Commander. So like you used to see in Battlestar Galactica, when Adama got on the radio, he said, this is Galactica actual. That's real. When I've seen one admiral talk on the radio, it was during an exercise. He didn't like the call, and so he decided to call up and argue with control. And so this is such and such actual, blah 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 blah. And the lieutenant, the very junior lieutenant on the other end, said, "Whatever you say, sir. Whatever." You say. Wasn't going to argue. That admiral, incidentally, was the one that was the closest to Fred Thompson's character in Hunt for Red October of any admiral I've ever met. He could have played Fred Thompson as the guy you'd want to play Barry Costello in the movie. But as a general rule, they don't talk on the radio. The only other thing that, and what I, by and large, the other like 4 or 5 times I heard them talk on the radio, it was something like, this is Bravo Bravo. It is now 16:35. You were supposed to give me a report at 16:30. Where's your report? And so why is he giving a report over the radio when he's still in the same ship? It's because other people are listening to it. I've actually seen 2 officers on a destroyer that were close enough that one of them at one point reached over and tapped the other one on the shoulder, but they're talking to each other. Most of their communication is on the radio, because the stuff that they're exchanging with each other is information that other people want to know too. And so, like at one point, the one tapped the other one on the shoulder, and so they both pull off their headsets for a second, like, wait a minute, did you say so? Okay, yeah, all right, thanks. And then they went back on and continued talking to each other over the radio, despite the fact that they were that close to each other. So there's a lot of stuff that gets done electronically, a lot of stuff that gets passed between ships, a lot of stuff that gets done by having multiple comm channels. And I would not expect that like Next Generation to do it exactly like that. And I sort of look at it and I go, they must be passing huge amounts of information back and forth, and we just don't see it. But I also think that in the time period that you're interested in, you know, the Federation up to this point, I think the right way to think about Starfleet is that it's very similar to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has 5 missions. I think I talked about this once before. The Coast Guard has 5 missions. They're like law enforcement, navigation, and ship safety, fisheries and pollution, environmental stuff, national security, as in terms of like border stuff, immigration stuff. And then their last mission is that they will actually go to war if the balloon goes up. And that's, you know, they practice for all of these things. They practice all of these things, but by and large, there's 4 missions that they do on kind of a daily basis, and then 1 mission they may be called upon to do. I think Starfleet is probably kind of in the same situation. And so in the time when the 4 Years' War is spinning up, they haven't really fought a war in a while. They have to kind of like remember how we actually go about fighting a war. And, you know, there's this misperception that the generals are always trying to fight the last war. That's actually wrong. It's very rarely the case that they're trying to fight the last war. What they may be trying to do, or what they're usually trying to do, is they've got the data of the last war. They know how that one turned out. And then there's been some level of change since then. And so they're trying to project what does the old stuff mean when you pass it through the level of change. What does the new thing look like? Most senior military officers are actually spending a lot of time being very forward thinking about stuff. But that doesn't mean that they get it right. And sometimes they're more skeptical than they probably should be. Other times they're less skeptical than they probably should be, because the only way you can actually really figure this stuff out is to actually go to war. That's how you figure it out.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. So getting back to my question is, I think that in Star Trek, we see a lot of stuff that's for dramatic purpose it doesn't make a lot of sense. Right.
Yeah.
There's so much that the computers would be doing it.
Yeah. And I'd really like to have an opportunity to go to sea and see what it looks like now. Because I should emphasize, my data points are all 15 years old at this point.
Oh my God, that's a lifetime.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when I first started going to sea, they had just discovered internet relay chat. They had just discovered chat. And so like the first time I go to sea, they're using they've got this sort of reach back thing that they can go to, and that's all based ashore. So they're bouncing things back ashore to chat with people. And there was this discussion about whether you can actually, it's like, well, you know, you can pass information, but you can't give an order over chat. You can't give orders over chat. So you have to do that over the radio. So it's like, you'd talk about it for a while, and then you'd actually say, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you do it over the radio. The next time I go to sea, they've concluded that they can pass orders over chat. And by the last time I go to sea, they're actually on the radio nowhere near as much as they were before, especially when the submarines come up. I mean, it started off with a submarine comes up and they talk to each other in the radio, and it only counts if it's on the radio. So there's some things that, you know, we have to pass this particular piece of information. It only counts if it's on the radio. We know we got it to them on chat, but it really only counts if it's on the radio. Okay. The next time they're passing it in both things, but it counts in chat, it counts on the radio. The last time I went to sea, every time the submarine came up, it's like, oh, the first they know that the submarine is up is they see it in chat. And they'd respond in chat, and sometimes nobody got on the radio. They did everything in chat. It was really interesting. And it also meant that if you weren't reading that chat, you had much less situational awareness.
Yeah.
First went to sea, I'm listening to them, their speaker, it's on a speaker. I can hear the radio guy on the submarine talking. I can hear both sides of the conversation going back and forth without having to put on a headset. Because there isn't a terminal really for me to take over. The terminals are all busy. I'm just standing off in a corner with a notebook. By the last time I went to see, all that stuff was happening in chat, and I'd have to go over afterwards and say, okay, can I peer over your shoulder after the fact now that you're not busy and sort of write down what I need and find out what you got. Now, on the flip side, one of the things that we'd say is, yeah, and I'm going to need your chat logs. So that became another data source that we could collect. I could always go back and read that stuff later if I needed it to sort of figure out, okay, when we're doing the reconstruction, because a big chunk, that's why I was there, to do an exercise reconstruction. Because you would think, everybody's in the exercise, right? We know what happened. No, you don't. You know what a tiny little piece of it is. And some of this involves submarine stuff where you're making guesses about the submarine, but you're not actually in contact with the submarine at the time. It wasn't unusual for the surface guys to say, we sunk the submarine, and then you'd actually look at the position reports and the submarine was, 30 miles away. Submarine wasn't anywhere near where they thought it was. So no, they didn't really sink it. And so we were the guys that created the ground truth so that you could play it back and sort of show what everything happened. So having that information written down was useful. Because I could go back and it's like, during this time period, something weird happened. Let me try to piece together exactly what happened there. So,
well, kind of a little off topic, but what did you think of the aircraft carrier scene in Sum of All Fears? Did you see that?
I have not seen Sum of All Fears, believe it or not.
Oh God, it's got like it's pretty much the only real battle scene where air to sea missiles attack an aircraft carrier.
Oh yeah, I need to go see that then.
You gotta go see that. Yeah, it's worth it just for that. It's pretty impressive. But and we're out of time here. But this has been a great primer on how our Navy does it. And someone asked way back when, so are you, said, hey, Alec, so are you basically trying to base what you're going to do in Star Trek based on what Chris is saying is happening in the Navy? And I wouldn't say we're trying to base it on it, but it's data points. I tend to think that it gives us a rational basis for why we want to do what we want to do in Star Trek. Hey, now we do it this way. So we can assume that in the future, even if it's not a real future, we are going to play at saying, okay, well, it's going to be something similar in the future. If we need Fleet Command to take care of, if we need an Aegis system to take care of, it makes sense that in the future there's going to be something similar. And I guess the question I'm keep driving at is how much of that is going to be automated. Right.
I would expect a lot of it to be automated. I mean,
I don't think in the future that CIC has more than 3 or 4 chairs.
It might not. Depends upon how many human decisions you have to make. And Star Trek traditionally has a lot of human decision making taking place in various things. But it doesn't have long, complicated procedures to implement decisions. And that's one of the reasons why you need guys to implement the long, complicated procedures. Like a lot of times you see people going to the display system and they're manually inputting the location of all the sonobuoys that got dropped, right? They've got a list of where they are and they're manually inputting all this stuff. And so you'd like to have a situation where all that stuff is done electronically. You don't have to create, and like you might be creating overlays that you put on. This is the op area we're going to be in today. This is the op area we intend to be in tomorrow. This is the op area over here. You highlight things that you might want to keep in place, and you basically stick that in a folder a computer folder so that you can put that overlay on the screen so that to help you organize the display. And so, you know, a lot of that stuff gets created manually, and it's like guys drawing lines and stuff like that. And you shouldn't need that in Star Trek. You should be able to just, you know, the number of times they just sort of speak to the air and say, computer, I need blah, 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 blah. And they, you know, I get 7,000 hits. If you can do a search engine that works that way, you should be able to do all this other stuff too. So the question is, what are the human decisions that need to be made? So a modern CIC, Navy CIC, has 5 canonical functions. Those are collect information, display the information, enable the evaluation of the information, disseminate the information out to other people who need it, like the rest of the fleet, and then facilitate the control of the fleet, right? So the control is, I'm a command and control node. I make decisions and I implement decisions. I make those decisions there. I know that in David Weber's Honorverse, Andy Presby and I have been arguing about this for 10 years now, about what exactly a CIC does in that universe. The one thing we're sure about is that it's probably the 4 canonical functions of CIC, because like Star Trek, those decisions about the control of the fleet and the control of the ship are made from the bridge, not made from CIC. Or in the case of an admiral, there might be a flag bridge where overall control is made. But on an individual warship, it's not made from CIC. CIC is a supporting function. So what does CIC do? I think it's mainly about controlling the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance process. So it's about sensors, it's about probes, it's about things like that. Maybe some tactical studies of what's going on. You know, we've run the simulation 1,000 times, and here's what we think they're going to do, sort of stuff. And then that information probably gets passed to a tactical officer. Every now and then you hear something that leads you to believe that maybe somewhere on that ship there's something that does something like that. And the question is, where is it and what do they do? And in the Honorverse, David occasionally has things in there. And I've told David, one of the things I want to do, I want to put on my Bu-9 hat. Next time I go through the books, reread the books, I'm looking for a battle. I'm looking for a battle where there's interaction with CIC, and CIC clearly does some stuff, but it's just in the form of, like, we call them up and they tell us something and it's useful. And I want to basically write a story, or at least a story fragment. It may not actually be a self-contained story, a story fragment about what happens in CIC. Because as it is right now, it's this magic crystal ball that has some guys standing around it. It's the big Palantir, you know, the one that fell in the river when Osceola fell. It's the big Palantir, and they're all gazing into the big Palantir, and that's really all we know about it. And same thing with Star Trek, because Star Trek hasn't really had to deal with it. And most of the time you see fleet battles in Star Trek, like all the stuff you see in Deep Space Nine and the stuff in it's more like undisciplined air combat than it is like anything that looks like either disciplined air combat or fleet combat.
Right.
It's like dogfighting air combat. It's not like beyond visual range air combat, which I think is a much more, I find BVR stuff to be much more interesting, because it's much more about the math and the procedure and how do I set this up and stuff like that. Once you get to the merge, it's really kind of yanking and banking. I mean, there's really more to it than that. I don't want to sell that short.
I think what we're going to have to do next week, I really think we need to spend, we've spent this whole show with you explaining modern warfare, which is fascinating. Yeah. You know, most of us don't know any of this. So it's great education. But I think what we need to do next week is then talk about, okay, let's extrapolate into the future and let's take some principles with us. And then let's talk about where we think the computers would be. And so what decision-making will be left to humans.
That might work for next week. It might be better to do deflector shields and structural integrity fields for next week to give Pat and I a little bit more time to think about the harder problem.
Right, that works for us. We'll get back to the shields with Pat next week. Yeah, and then what I'd like to do and then we'll have that conversation. And maybe 3 weeks out, we can take a piece of the Axanar script that no one's seen and talk about it. We'll review it.
That works.
That'd be fun. All right. Well,
that would be a lot of fun.
That's it for now. We'll see everyone tomorrow for the Constar watch party at 6, and then followed up at 10 by Axanar After Dark. We'll have Pat back next weekend. In the meantime, I want to thank everyone. Thank Lissa, our producer. Thank Dale, who's out there working the Starfleet, working all the membership for Starfleet. Thank you so much. By the way, the Axanar backpacks have shipped. They're all done. So if you ordered one, it's gone. And if you didn't order one, why not? Go order one in the Aries Studio store. Thank you all for being here. And Chris just took off. I think his cat scared him.
No. That noise you just heard was my cat knocking my Surface Pro onto the floor.
Yikes.
Yeah. So hopefully he didn't damage it.
All right.
Well, he didn't damage it.
He's like, and what if I did? All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone. We'll see everyone tomorrow at 6 for the Constar Watch Party, followed at 10 by Axanar After Dark. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.